So Michal is the co-founder at Fluid Chains, which enables transformative blockchain projects. He's also certified EXO continents. He also PhD in sustainable energy systems from MIT, Portugal, and is an alumnus of Singularity University, which is a common thread which seems to bind many of these EXO experts. I like that Michal combines meaning and plain innovation. And Michal, the floor is all yours. Please take the floor.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. And maybe let me screen share. And it's taking a while. So maybe in the meantime, we'll be talking about prototyping today and validation. And anytime, just feel free to interrupt, ask questions, or ask me to speak slower or clarify stuff, okay?
All good so far.
So I'm not going to introduce myself more, but maybe just show you a little bit of a reason why I'm here and talking to you about prototyping. So I did a lot of different prototypes and a lot of different validation over the years, and I think this is one quite interesting example, which I can show you here. And if you did not recognize from the title, you can try to guess what kind of device this is. And I'm not sure if you can see my video. Can you see my video?
Not yet.
But it's loading.
Now we can.
Okay, so any clue what is this?
3D printing.
And what is it 3D printing?
Too early to say.
I hope it's chocolate.
I hope
Yes.
Like chocolate.
Yes, so this is chocolate. Now try to guess what year was that done in?
2001.
No, 2013. And
Wow.
how much time and money did it cost?
$1 million.
No. Other guesses?
$200.
Well, okay, we're not that great, but it took us a team of 6 weeks and around $2,000. Okay.
Wow.
Wow.
So it's possible to prototype and validate different things, even if they might seem like fairly complex. But of course, you need a plan, and then you need some skills. So let's talk a little bit about that. Okay. And I'm wondering why my laptop is so slow. So the plan for today, we'll do a little bit of a warm up. Then I'll show you some common pitfalls when teams try to prototype and validate stuff. Then talk a little bit about good practices, and then go through a few common types of prototypes and validation tools with some tips and tricks there. And then wrap up talking a little bit about experimentation or prototype driven development in organization, and just finish up with Q&A. Okay. So with that, and sorry, it's really slow. Okay, so a bit of a warm up for us. Now, what are the goals of prototyping? Why do we do prototyping during a sprint? Any ideas? Suggestions?
Let's hear it from our sprinters. Come on, sprinters, whoever's here, please come off mute and start interacting. Or you can type in the chat if you're shy to talk. Michal likes it to be interactive. So let's get going, guys. What do we have?
That's why I called it a warm up, because sometimes it takes a while.
Okay, we have someone typing goals of prototyping to prove the concept. All right, Pravesh?
To bring concept more closer to the reality.
Okay, that can be one.
Validate the idea.
And why do we need to validate the idea?
Rahul, would you like to come off mute?
Yes. I just want to ask you, the goal of prototyping is to get the validation of that we are thinking that it is practically can be done or not.
Okay. So whether it can be done, and now we have reduction of risk. So my personal take is twofold. Okay, so we do a lot of prototyping to learn, and also a lot of validation to learn, but also to de-risk our idea. So those are two things, and in many cases, it's encapsulated in MVP, minimum viable prototype. Um, and I'll talk a bit about that a bit later on. But the key goal is on one side learning, but also reducing the risk. And now, do you recognize this thing? What is this?
Yeah, yeah, canvas, business canvas.
And what are those yellow things inside? So what do you have in your business model canvas? Like, what did you write down there? Any clues?
Different streams on this.
Any other suggestions or opinions? Okay, so I'll give you my perspective, which is that every single thing that you put in your business model is effectively an assumption, right? So Suman and the coaches already spoke to you at length about those assumptions and hypotheses, right? And why do we do this? So if we have this equation and a lot of things are right, but a single thing is wrong, what will be the result?
Not the perfect result.
Okay. We got an answer. Sorry, can you repeat that one?
Not the 100% right solution.
Okay, so actually, when you think about business, in most cases, it means failure. Okay, so it's hard to be like 95% or like 55% successful with a business. What happens, especially if you think about startups, so the young companies driven by technology and innovation, if you get a single thing wrong, the whole thing might fail, right? So maybe your timing is really bad. Maybe you picked the wrong market segment. Maybe your pricing is really bad. Maybe you just picked the wrong distribution channel. Every single thing that you do might actually lead to you failing in your business. So that's why it's really important to test all those different assumptions that you have around how this business will work. So if you already kind of agreed that all of those things are assumptions, where should we begin testing? And which of the boxes?
Customer segment.
Any others?
Value proposition, customer segment, revenue streams.
Oh, okay. So good. Great. Now we're getting more answers. So yes, the biggest risk that you can take is to build something that no one wanted or needed in the first place. And that goes a little bit to what someone mentioned before, that we want to test or validate the idea, right? So we should begin with checking whether there's desirability, and that more or less maps to the right hand side of the canvas. Then you have feasibility and viability. And what normally happens is when you start testing ideas, you should first focus whether there's demand or need for it. And then as you go deeper and deeper and you invest more and more time, then you focus more and more on feasibility and viability. And that's also the way that you go around validation and prototyping. Because again, the biggest risk you can do is to do an invention or innovation that no one really needs or there's no demand for it. So in most cases, you focus around the problem, then you see whether the problem is big enough for the person or is dire enough for the person to actually look for solutions to that problem. And whether there's a market or business. And one common mistake I see that people often do is that they say it's like, oh, our business problem is that we don't have high enough of a margin. But a corporation is not a person, so it's a problem for a business, but not necessarily for an individual. So just always make sure that you have a person in mind that is using your product. So now, what about this picture? What's happening here? Any ideas? Anyone can create a story around this picture?
Carbon patch.
And what else?
Tattoos.
Mm-hmm.
A vaccine. Test
Mm-hmm.
patch.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the reality is it's a photo from CDC, Center for Disease Control, and it's around vaccination, but it's around flu vaccination, and it's a discussion around it. It's not actually administering the vaccine. And when I show these photos to people nowadays, their first impression is that, hey, it's a COVID vaccine, right? So we oftentimes create those narratives and assumptions around things that might or might not be true. And in this case, even if you think about this, the whole situation that it's around vaccination, there are many things that we might assume that is true. So, for example, the lady on the left, we might assume she's a doctor, but maybe she's a nurse, maybe she's just a volunteer, right? So we should always remember that we have our own narratives and biases, and other people who are involved are there. So we should always make sure that we document our assumptions and don't take anything for granted. And then we have common pitfalls, right? So the most common one is asking the wrong questions. And what is wrong with this question?
Close-ended.
Okay. Anything else that is wrong with this question?
The word more does not specify what exactly you want to measure.
Mm-hmm. Any other things that we can fix or improve with this question?
I think it's a
Leading-
leading question. Basically, it is already telling the person what they are desiring. It should have been a more broad-based question.
Mm-hmm. And it would lead to what kind of answer?
So this would be a simple yes or no. If it was a more broad-based question, they would have probably described which particular attribute do they like about the town.
So is it more likely that someone would say yes, or would they say no?
They would definitely say yes to this.
So the things that you said, yes, they're really important. But in this particular case, what I really wanted to focus on is that you don't learn much from this question. Most people want to be good or perceived good. So if they can, of course, be a better person or they can have more money, they would answer yes. I mean, like, why wouldn't they, right? So in this case, we won't learn much from that question. And what you can do is to have structured process. Now, you definitely saw already some tools. Two really good ones is the test card and learning card from Strategizer, where it helps you to create the structure. And then also when you look at your business model, you can start listing your key assumptions. And then there's this thing called Lean Startup Canvas, where you can systematically go through each and every key assumption that you have and then systematically go through that, right? So then you avoid just focusing on the questions that might not be really relevant for you in the big picture. Now, imagine a situation with a golden wheelchair. Would you use a golden wheelchair? Yes? No? Zahira, I see you on the camera, so let's have a conversation. So,
Yes.
okay, so imagine you have $1 billion, okay?
Yes.
And then imagine that you can't walk, so you need to use a wheelchair.
Mm-hmm.
You have $1 billion, so would you like to use a golden wheelchair?
I would just like a wheelchair, period. I wouldn't care if it's gold.
But money is not an object. I mean, you have billions of dollars. And gold
I would,
is a great metal. It's really malleable, so the suspension will be much better.
yes. But for me, it wouldn't matter. I would just want the wheelchair to be my transport vehicle to walk.
Okay. And what if it had an electric motor, 100% renewable?
Now you're talking.
Okay, so it's great because actually I've been working for the past 2 years on a wheelchair with an electric motor. Would you be interested?
I would be interested. I have participants in the chat saying no. Anuj says no, and Pravesh says yes. So maybe we would like to get more views, more response.
Okay.
Pravesh?
So what was wrong with this conversation or this exchange?
Would you like me to answer?
Yes.
I'm healthy. Why I need wheelchair? Because it is golden. Is it attracting me to you start using that?
So one of the things is that you actually don't need a wheelchair. So if I talk with you, we have a what if situation, and you're just imagining what would happen if. And that's not a very reliable source of information. And then I told you, it's like, hey, if you had a lot of money, so like then you don't have issue with the price, right? And then
Yes.
I'm telling you, it's a hey, I've been working on that. So like there are multiple errors there, and one way to go around that is for you to check, if you haven't done that already, something called mom's test. So there's a small slide share presentation talking with customers. So two of the biggest mistakes normally you can do when you do validation is that you get fluff, which is basically information which is not really reliable. So I can ask, do you like my idea? Yeah, it's great. And like it's not really reliable for me. And then the other one is exposing your ego or leading with what you're working on. So strongly recommended. Just check out the presentation so you don't make those mistakes. Now, who of you likes pizza? Okay, that's at least one. And now, do you like burnt pizza?
Come on, sprinters. Do you like burnt pizza?
Certainly not.
So if I want to learn whether you like pizza and I serve you a burnt pizza, am I getting reliable information?
No.
We have no in the chat.
Yeah, and for me is no as well. And why is that? So this is so-called burned pizza problem. We oftentimes talk about this minimum viable product and that it's supposed to take you from point A to point B. So it has to solve some kind of a problem or job. The point there is, as with pizza, there might be a lot of different qualifiers. So a burnt pizza is still a pizza, but if I serve you a burnt pizza, I won't get an answer whether you like pizza, but I will get an answer whether you like burnt pizza. So when you think about picking your features for prototypes or also what kind of things you want to validate, you need to make sure that you balance out the minimum set of features that is really required to fulfill the job, but then also focus on all the other factors that might be enhancing the performance or delighting your users or customers. So let's say if you release a website for a clothing brand that is supposed to be targeted at very young, chic people, and it has very poor design, it will be a burnt pizza. So it doesn't mean that your clothes are bad or there might be no demand for it. It just doesn't match what this specific customer needs. So even if you think about this minimum viable product, and just make sure that you cover the functional needs, but then also you do all the other things that might be required for this specific group of people. Okay. So now about the oftentimes misunderstood MVP. So early on, I showed you that for me personally, there are two goals to prototyping and validation. One is learning, and the other one is around the risking. So of course, before you build a very expensive device or installation, you want to do a prototype, you need to do proof of concept, and then gradually you scale up. That's the normal thing. But in most cases, it's not necessarily an MVP in a sense that it does help you learn, but you focus on building the prototype or building the product. So that's why there's this notion of prototype, and I think Suman already told you because that's where I got the slide here. Is in most cases you actually want to test stuff before you build anything, and that's around learning. So that's why first you have this minimum viable learning, and then based on your learning, you pick the minimum set of features that could fulfill the job. And only after you test that one, then you build the first version of the product.
I have one question.
Yes.
We are working on a project of hydrogen green energy.
Uh-huh.
So, if you are explaining with examples in the future slide, we would like to also understand how do we do a prototype for a hydrogen green energy project. And the project scope is related to only storage and distribution. So how do we do prototype? Because that is very confusing for us. We had a discussion internally within the team today, but we were not able to get a proper answer for how do we do that.
Okay. So actually, I have something around this topic because I spoke with a different team from actually an oil and gas company around green hydrogen. But let me just start addressing part of that topic here. So let's rewind a bit back. First of all, are you an edge team or a core team?
Edge team.
So what's your goal as an edge team?
The scope which has been given to us is actually our goal was very big, but after the fifth week, we have been told to restrict to only storage and distribution of hydrogen gas energy. Our earlier goal was to produce also the same.
Mm-hmm. So as an edge project, are you building a new business or are you trying to do something with the existing business model or organization?
We have a small energy.
And
We have an energy plant unit which is based on fossil fuel. From
Mhm.
fossil fuel, we are directly moving to hydrogen gas.
So who's your customer in this case?
Our customer will be individual household, government organizations, railways, institutions.
And who's your existing customer now?
Existing customer is only uh, Trident internally, for which energy is produced, and the neighboring areas of Punjab.
Mm-hmm. And now, what are you offering to your prospective clients? Like, what's the value proposition with green hydrogen?
Uh, Presently, actually, that we are going to frame up today evening in a proper manner, but the basic steps what we have taken for value proposition today is uh, providing to the fuel pumps for electric vehicle, and second is for railways, and we are debating actually the value proposition. By today evening we'll be able to freeze it properly.
Okay. No problem. And it's not that I'm grilling you, but this is a very common thing, especially when you have those high-tech engineering projects. Now, you did mention fuel cells and vehicles based on hydrogen, but there are very few of them. So on one side, you're kind of stuck with existing situation, and you're trying to do something, but then your ultimate vision might be very far into the future. So I'll just skip a little bit. Okay, which was actually the next slide that I wanted to talk about. If you have very high tech projects, oftentimes the teams focus too much on R&D and the actual numbers. So when I told you, I spoke with a team from an oil and gas company saying, we're working on green hydrogen. Can you tell us, what's the cost of electrolyzer for renewable offshore wind energy? And I would argue that this is probably not the best question to ask at this point in time, because of course, you can do this cost estimate and the viability and estimate the market size, but this is not exactly EXO thinking. This is more of an engineering on R&D project, or maybe cost accounting. Okay. So why I'm mentioning that? Because if you think about your project, there's a reason why you want to go into green hydrogen. And you have not told me what's the reason. And you have not told me what's your MTP. So what's your vision of the future? And in most cases, I know it's not necessarily helpful for you to validate yet or to go into prototyping, but my suggestion is to revert it back. So, okay, you want to work on green hydrogen. Why you want to work on green hydrogen? Because you have a vision of the future, some kind of a transformation happening 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. So then you can start thinking about what's the vision of the future and then how you can get there. And when you think about how you can get there, so let's say if you have hydrogen future, you would have um, cars for hydrogen, right? You'd probably have lots of renewables. You'd probably have a lot of new chemicals. You might need some kind of refueling station system. Maybe there will be drones for hydrogen. Like there might be lots of other things that will be necessary. And you can look at what's happening there. And this is where you start thinking, it's like, hey, I can get here and here and here. And that is why. Because ultimately, you're assuming that green hydrogen will be cost effective in the future and there will be demand for uh, green fuels. That's your assumption for the future, and then you need to check how you want to get there, and you want to have this first early point and then go later on. But I'm going a little bit off topic, and why this is really important, because if you focus too much on the early future and you think actually more as a core team or basically an engineering team, you will focus on product performance. So you start looking and say, hey, what's the cost of the electrolyzer? What's the current cost of hydrogen? Who can use it, and so on. But this won't necessarily get you very, very far, because you're forgetting about all the other types of innovation that you have. So this is a framework called 10 types of innovation. So you can iterate here, like around the brand or the channel or the business model, all sorts of stuff. So if you just start talking with experts, which is one of the ways that you can try to validate your idea, they will tell you, say, hey, yeah, of course you can create, green hydrogen. It's not cost effective now. And that will be probably the end, the end of your initiative if you just keep it like that. Did it help it in any way, or was it confusing?
Does anybody else from the team want to come in? Disruptors? Anyone else from the team? Pravesh?
Yeah, actually, I had just taken a minute leave. What is the question? Can you repeat, please?
Michal was trying to answer the question you raised, and he asked whether his answer was satisfactory to you.
Yeah, the answer is satisfactory. The only thing what we are trying to do is that the challenge which we are facing, how do we do prototype? That is the only challenge which we are facing. We will take more guidance from our coach today evening after this class.
Okay, so just to summarize my tangent, I would strongly suggest you go back to your MTP and look at what kind of things you predict will be true in the future, and then try to go back from there. If you really want to validate something, especially if you have a goal, but because it seems that you have a goal to deliver in the short term, and you don't want to innovate much around the business model or the other components, which I think is maybe not a mistake, but it makes your life harder. Then you can go back, to your business model canvas and start with business segments, because my assumption is that none of those segments will actually tell you, or those potential customers will tell you, okay, because it's too expensive now. And then if they tell you it's like, hey, it's too expensive now, then you will need to go again into like this iteration to figure out what kind of value you can deliver that would justify this kind of a cost. But that's the assumption or hypothesis I have around your project at this point in time. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and one more thing. So common pitfall. I know that a lot of you might not have much hands-on experience with, design, or maybe talking with customers, or maybe building stuff yourself. But you should not outsource the learning. And what I mean by that, you learn a lot when you start talking with the customers. So let's say if you have this initiative around green hydrogen, you should be there talking with the person to whom you're trying to sell this green hydrogen initiative, because that's how you will learn. Or let's say if you want to build a clickable prototype or a video, or interview your customers, someone from your team should be there to gather those intangible insights that you just get from experiencing stuff by yourself or just learning by yourself. Because otherwise, if someone else builds it for you, yes, you have the prototype, yes, you might have the website, yes, you might have some interview materials, but this learning and this know-how is not with you, but with someone else. So outsource the building of stuff, but not learning. Okay. So now, like good practices, plan and prep. Um, Even something as simple as a survey, considering how little time you have and how busy you are, might be hard. And what I mean by that. So, drawing from my experience, I did a survey for a community I'm part of, 1,500 people. And it seemed that we could do that in a few weeks, but then there were like more and more problems popping out. We realized like, hey, most of the free tools, they have a limit of 50 surveys or 500 surveys. So we need to look for paid ones. And then we got, 1,500 answers, but then we realized that some of the answers we have are in comma separated files, but then some of the answers have commas in it. So if you want to put it into Excel, it just doesn't work. Like all the answers are completely messed up. So even something as simple as a survey can be problematic unless you plan and prep and you really do that in advance. So don't underestimate even the simplest things that you can do. Okay. Now, when you ask for the signals, it's really important to get reliable signals. So going back to green hydrogen initiative, if you ask someone, say, hey, would you like to have green hydrogen? Sure, of course. And then if you say it's like, hey, I will offer you this green hydrogen for, let's say, $20 per, I don't know, unit of energy, and that would be acceptable price, they will say, sure, like, I'll take it. But it doesn't mean that they will do that in the future, and doesn't mean that you will actually deliver. So when you do surveys or you have likes, yes, you can see whether there is an interest, but it doesn't mean that it will translate into a business. So what you want in terms of signals is, first of all, money. So if someone can sign a document like letter of intent, memorandum of understanding, or you have a website where they can click through and they can try to pay with money, that's a very strong signal. If you ask someone to do an hour interview or like 1 hour, 2 hour usability test with you and they offer the time, that's a strong signal, because time is scarce, right? And also another interesting trick is social capital. And what I mean by that, it's basically asking for recommendation. So if someone has really bad experience with you and you ask them, say, hey, can you introduce me to a person who might be a good fit for like this kind of activity, or who might be a potential user, and they tell you no, that's a signal that something is not going right. But if they introduce you to other people, it's a, hey, I know this person, it might be useful for someone else, that's also a decent signal that you might get. So rather than trying to get 3,000 likes, if you can get a single request for a contract, it's probably much better signal for your initiative. Okay. Other thing, yeah, I mean, like, start with the most important stuff. So if you realize that, let's say, green hydrogen is extremely expensive at this point in time, probably that's already a signal for you to iterate, right? If you can't find the customer or you can't identify who would be the person buying, again, you might have a problem. And even if you think about this green hydrogen, it's like, okay, railways are going to buy that. But then you need to identify the person within the railway company who would be willing to make the decision, or, it might be a group of people who are doing this decision, right? So start with your most important assumptions that can destroy your business. So in most cases is that there is no demand for actually what you want to do, or the technology is not ready yet. And then based on that, if this assumption fails, you can start to think, it's like, hey, maybe I can add more value so the price is justified. It's like, okay, if this technology is not available now, what are the things I can do tomorrow? Because I know that this technology will be available a few years into the future. And the story I do remember from Singularity University was around Second Life, which is one of those first VR spaces. So the founder had this kind of breakthrough insight that you can't really interact very well online in those virtual worlds unless there's a very low latency of the connection. I don't remember the number. It was maybe 50 milliseconds or something. So he kept on working in his company for 7 years, waiting until internet connection improves. And then when he realized that, hey, this is the inflection point, so the internet speed is good enough, people have enough computing power at home, that's when he jumped on the idea. Other thing, by default, ship nothing. So I played a video of this, 3D printer that we were building, and one of the things that my friend was really insistent on is that it can't operate in a batch mode; it has to be in a continuous mode. So for that, we need a pump. So our first option is, of course, look for companies making tiny pumps that we could use for chocolate. So then we called companies and asked for quotes from them. And I know in India it's not very polite to say no, and oftentimes you won't get a direct no. And it happened to us as well. So basically, they said that the pump, the size of the fist, they gave us a quote for 40,000 euros, which is an indirect way to say it's like, stop bothering us, we're not going to do that. So in most cases, if you decide to add some specific features, or even your customer says it's like, hey, if you do this, then we will buy, unless they sign a document, you should probably not doing that, and like not do that, because it might just not pay off. Why this is really important, so there's this really cool book called Lean Product Playbook. There might be a lot of features that will actually not add much value or not convince your customer, that are not relevant, but it might require a lot of work. So in most cases, you want, going back to the burn pizza problem, you want to focus on shipping the minimum amount of features that get you from point A to B. Like with the example of the car and a bicycle and a skateboard. So it gets you from A to B. And then you might add some of the things that are improving the performance or becoming the lighters. I saw that some of you have some ideas around blockchain, and I worked on blockchain, and it's actually quite tricky. So one of the things that we released recently is the certificate solution. And it's missing a lot of features, but it was also great because some of the customers from the enterprise, sorry, okay, can you hear me fine? Because I see that the host stopped my video.
Yes, we can hear you, Michal.
We can hear you.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, maybe I'm not very presentable today. So going back to this example, we spoke with enterprise clients, and they said like, we're not going to buy your solution unless we can import a lot of names, so it can be automated, and we have APIs. But then when we came back and said, hey, like we can already you can already import a list, and we have the API, they still didn't buy. So be really cautious about, again, people making promises around the future without having specific things, and make sure that you prioritize the most important things for you and for your business. Wait, okay. So yeah, that's actually a working certificate. Another thing, picking the right tool and method. Host, okay. There are different types of tests, and I will show you some methods of validation. So some of them are qualitative and some of them are quantitative. So in most cases, when you want to do stuff like viability, like financial viability, yeah, you want to have some numbers. But if you're early on in your testing desirability, probably you want softer inputs, and those will be qualitative. And also some of them, especially when you have products later on, might be around usability. So then you can have a different type of variations. But some of them early on, let's say testing raw demand or the need, might focus only on marketing in the front end. And what's the core idea here? The more complicated tests and the one that require more effort, they should come later on because they are basically more intensive. But early on, you want to pick the right tool for the method, which is normally the cheapest and the fastest one. So let's say if you have crowdfunding here, it actually takes a lot of effort to try to do a crowdfunding campaign. So before you want to do a crowdfunding campaign and see whether people will put money on top of it, you probably want to do just a landing page first, okay? And this book called Testing Business Ideas, they have a lot of different trees where they give you suggestions like what should you do first and what should you do next. I don't think that will be a concern for you at this point in time because you have very little time. So just go with something simple that provides you with some meaningful data, okay? So hands-on prototyping, lots of different methods, and they will give you different types of signals. So let's say if you do a survey and survey is here, your evidence strength will be very low. So in most cases, people will answer questions, but they won't offer you time, they won't offer you money, they won't offer you their connections, but it's easy to do, okay? So you can pick different methods, and I'll go through some of them and what are the tips and tricks. So when you do surveys, really make sure that you ask the most important questions and you don't lead people. So this is where mom's test comes in. What you might forget is that you need to get the right sample, and this is a tricky bit. So if you're going to a new customer segment, you probably don't have access to those customers. So how are you going to send a survey to them? So this is what people sometimes forget. And one of the solutions here is either use your personal connections or find those groups. If you think about the EXO canvases, basically find those communities communities online, or let's say if it's a professional thing, just go into LinkedIn and okay, I see that I might have become a host. So go to LinkedIn, and in some cases you can also do ads. And don't forget that tools have limitations. So if you do those really large surveys or more complicated surveys, you might need more complicated tools, and that also takes time. Interviews, right? I would not do interviews unless you read Mom's Test or check this presentation. A really important thing is to have a script, and ideally having two people. Why? Because one person can have a conversation and the other person can observe and take notes. And of course, there's a typical flow to things. We can talk a bit about that a bit more, but there's a lot of materials online. For example, Design Kit from Idea and Akumen. But there is a flow. So you want to have an icebreaker. You want to have those qualifying questions to make sure that you're actually talking to the right people. And only after that, you just go to more specific questions. And yeah, the rule here, if you don't follow all the other ones, is don't ask about the future, ask about the past. So an example, let's say you are thinking about microfiber towels. So you wouldn't ask, it's like, would you buy microfiber towels? It's like, hey, what kind of towels have you used before? How many did you buy? How often do you buy? It's like, what type is it? Like, what color is it? And if microfiber doesn't come up, it's probably not on the radar, and there might be a reason for it. And then you can start digging deeper. It's like why that might be, without mentioning the word microfiber, which is the other point. So don't sell your idea, right? So don't lead people on. Expert interviews. So that's an interesting bit. It's important for you to weed out some of the ideas early on, but personally, I don't think it's super useful in the context of a sprint, because talking with experts is oftentimes like lawyers. A professor of mine at the university used to say that experts don't need to think they know. So what an expert will tell you is all the issues that might come up when you think about the idea, and if the expert tells you that it's doable, it's most likely doable. But if you have a crazy idea, they most likely will tell you it's impossible, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. So this is a little bit of a conundrum. So if you have questions like, can it be done like this? And then you show them, specific flow. Yes, talk with experts. Now, if you want to ask, say, hey, I want to do green hydrogen. What are the issues with green hydrogen? Yes, they will give you a long list of, like what are the issues. But otherwise, they will just tell you, no, you can't do green hydrogen. It's not a good idea now. Okay. So in that sense, talking with experts might be a double-edged sword.
Dia says experts don't need to think, they already know.
Yeah, exactly.
I just quoted Michal in the chat, so it's just...
yeah, and I quoted a professor of mine. So
Michal,
yes.
Michal, sorry to interrupt. Could you try turning your video on?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Could you try turning your video on?
But I do have my video on.
You prefer it not to be on?
No, but for me it shows that my video and the camera is on.
Oh, we can't see. Can you all see? Dia, can you confirm if you can see?
No.
Yeah, I turned it off and then I turned it on. Can you see it now?
No, we can't. It's just a blank screen.
Okay, that's weird.
Can the host turn it on, maybe?
Okay.
From the participant.
Can see you now.
Okay. So let's go back.
It's good. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that someone disabled my camera, but then it was on again. So is everything fine now?
Perfect.
Okay, cool. So another thing you might do is videos. And now my suggestion is probably try to do it later on. And why I'm saying that you should probably do that later on. They're great as explainers, but not necessarily as a prototyping or a validation tool, in a sense that before you do the video, you need to understand very well how the stuff might work. So then you probably want to do the whole customer journey and the storyboard first. And then when you show it to the people, you will definitely be leading them on with the solution. So it's great for explainers. It's great for checking usability, but it might not be perfect unless you're very smart about it. So example was Dropbox, where they made a video of how stuff could work without building it first. And when they realized that there's demand for it, then they actually built it. So that's where you have a valid case. But for videos, again, it might take more time than you expect. You should definitely begin with a script and images. So the hack I learned from a colleague of mine is you literally start with a table, and the table has 3 different columns. So first you have the slide title, or let's say your keyframe, then what's inside that, or what's the message you want to have, and then put some ideas for what kind of images you might have there. So when you structure it like that, and also you can use the same thing for presentations, you will get a flow of basically, keyframes or key ideas that go one after another. This content is basically part of your script, and the image is the type of imagery you might have there. And if you present it like that, it's quite likely that someone from an agency will be able to take it from there and work on that. If not, there are a lot of tools that are free to use, like Render Forest. But again, you need to make sure that you have a script and a flow, and you think of the images before that. And one other useful framework, which does not necessarily apply to videos, but a lot of other stuff as well, is Roam. So always make sure that you understand who is your audience, what's the objective, in this case, what's the objective of making the video, what do you want from them in terms of an action after the video. So if you have a video on the website, if you want them to do something, for example, register, you should make sure that you include that in the video. If it's just an explainer and you don't want them to do anything, you should make sure that they get this impression and this thinking that they don't need to do anything. And then the last thing is around impression style. So one risk that you have here, if you do a very fancy video, and nowadays it's easy to make fancy videos, is that you will create expectations, and those expectations will be very high, and then you won't be able to deliver. So just be mindful of that. So now storyboards and user journeys. Definitely, if you haven't done that, begin with personas. And this is an example from like a course I did. Begin with personas around your customer segments. And then a very useful exercise is the Crazy 8, which comes from the Google Design Sprint. So take a piece of paper, literally like here, fold it into 8 pieces, and you can use it in 2 different ways. So one is you want to tell the whole story or the whole customer journey in 8 pictures or 6 pictures. And you take maximum a minute to create an image. The other way is if you have a specific user journey or thing in mind, let's say people charging electric vehicles or people charging vehicles with green hydrogen, then you can go with a question, how can we, for example, charge electric vehicles? And then you can imagine, all the different types of solutions that you might have. So someone might want, and then again, you take 1 minute per one idea and you just keep on going, and you can generate more and more. So if someone charges an electric car, it's hey, maybe they charge it at home. Then maybe they charge it next to work. Maybe then they have inductive charging. Maybe then they charge it while they are driving, because there are those magnetic coils under your road. And then you keep on going with that. Other thing that you can do is to look at the whole end-to-end experience. So if you consider, let's say, an electric car, before people get an electric car, they need to do some research. And then based on the research and some of the things that come up during the research, they make the decision. So before they make the decision, they need to realize that, hey, I need a new car, and maybe an electric vehicle is a good car. Then once they have the car, they will use it, or they will need to maintain it. So it's like they need to do charging. It's like what with batteries are no longer working, and then they will get rid of the car. So for most of the services and products you have, there's a whole life cycle. And when you start mapping it out, you might get a lot of ideas how you can add value or do things in a new way. Just detailing this whole experience and just finding those leverage points and opportunities. Now, low fidelity and high fidelity prototyping. So low fidelity means basically low detail, and high fidelity means high detail. So the easiest way is basically to start scribbling. It's fine to have, like flowcharts, in a sense, what happens step after step. If you have a website or you have some kind of like a product, then you can just draw the screens and draw the boxes. This is an actual example. And again, there's an order to this stuff, because the higher fidelity you do, the more information you need and the more time and resource intensive it is. But then it's also closer to what the result could look like. So unless you're quite clear around what the user experience will be and what's the user journey will be like, it will be probably hard for you to do those high fidelity or low fidelity prototypes, at least when it comes to, let's say, clickable prototypes or prototypes of your service or design. And always make sure before you go to high fidelity, go low fidelity. And one thing that is really helpful, at least for me, is to use ad libs. So I told you about those must-have features, should have features, could have features, and then will not have features. So what you can do is you can think as a user and start saying, say, hey, as a user and a specific type. So let's say as an electric car owner, I want to charge my car in order to, okay, so this adlib doesn't work very well here, but let's say as an electric car owner, I want to charge my car whenever it's convenient for me. Or as an electric car owner, I always want to be within a charging distance from like a charging station.
Michal,
Yes.
you may like to just expand adlib for the greater audience.
Adlib is basically some kind of a structured sentence or like a flow where you substitute some stuff. So it's nothing else than some kind of like a verbal formula that you can substitute stuff inside. And thank you for the cat. So I have some things here since there was a request for it. So if you think about low fidelity, those are my actual scribbles. What happened after those scribbles is beginning of digitization. So this is how the interface start to look like. But before we got into how the interface might look like, this was broken down. So as I told you, using those user stories, there's a landing page. So people land on the website, then they might want to do something. And this is a different example. So in this case, it's all for digital asset distribution. So I think a lot of people who work with EXO, they already went through that process. So what was the design? So it's like, yes, people go to the website, but then someone has to create a campaign or someone has to feed the assets before they can be distributed. And then if you're claiming the assets, so you're getting the distribution, you might have a different flow. So once you start thinking about, it's like, hey, this user has to do A, B, C, D, then you get a better idea, like how does it flow? And then you start picking the minimum set of experiences, and then you can go into higher fidelity prototyping. So this is a very old example that we did, and that was actually with Diego many years back. So this is a mix of high fidelity and low fidelity prototypes. So we, again, envisioned some kind of a service, picked out the minimum amount of explanation that we might have to explain how it works, and then made a clickable prototype. I'll share this later on. So this is a live prototype and you can just click through. And another thing which we did is this literally has 8 screens. So then we recorded a video. So a video, and by the way, I didn't say that, but it's best nowadays if you do a video under 2 minutes. If it's more than 2 minutes, people usually lose attention. So in this case, we had short videos with audio over those screens that were clicked through. So
Michal,
then,
Michal,
yes.
sorry, could you please go full screen? You're presenting interesting stuff, but
Yeah,
we
so,
would like to. Yeah.
So maybe let me show you this one, and we can go into details. So this was done long ago, so it's in Vision. Now people don't prototype too much in Vision, but this is a simulated experience, and we just recorded the screen later on. So in this case, you can go to all those different things, but I don't know. I think I need to accept cookies or something. No, it's just really slow. So yes, it's super slow. Oh, and this is a landing page. Sorry. I don't I don't remember this flow very well, so maybe let me try a different option. Oh, okay. So like here. So this is a clickable prototype. What normally happens here is that you can just go through those things with those blue items. What we did do with some of the clients, but again, that comes later on, is when you have this more detailed clickable prototype, like here, then you can start to test it with users and get very detailed user feedback. So in this case, we have a more detailed clickable prototype, as you can see here. So this is how the screens navigate and go from one to the other, and you can have an interactive version. In this case, it's done in Figma. And then you can see that here you also have those blue boxes. And then you see that if you click here, it goes to one place. If you click here, it goes to another one. If you click here, there might be some kind of a pop-up. So this is a way for you also to do user testing and usability testing. The catch here, it takes a lot of time and effort to get to that point, unless you can outsource it. But if you want to outsource it, you need to be ready to provide detailed specifications to the teams that are going to work on that. So it's like, hey, there will be 5 input fields, and if I click on this input field, this will happen, and so on. So that's why it usually doesn't make much sense to do it unless you already have a clear idea how the whole thing will operate. And basically that requires you to do those user stories, low fidelity prototypes, and personas, and all sorts of other things beforehand. Okay.
Michal, question for you.
Yes. Yes.
Typically, in corporate sprints, do sprinters end up outsourcing this expertise?
It depends. There were some sprints in which there was a dedicated resource to help with prototyping, but it's not always the case. In some situations, the teams were struggling a little bit because maybe some of the ideas were hard to prototype or test. Let's say, like this is the green hydrogen thing. It sounds more like a research project than an actual business at this point. In some cases, they just didn't have much time. But there were also some other teams that did not have other dedicated resources, and they did perfectly fine. So they made a website and actually started to get orders for this website during the sprint. So there's this whole range, and it really depends whether your team has those skills or not. It's great if you don't have those skills and you can outsource. But if you can't, you just work with what you have.
Right. Thank you.
No problem. So other thing that is good to do is websites and landing pages. So again, one example, when COVID was starting, with a colleague, we did this thing called crisis response canvas, because we figured out it's like, hey, maybe companies actually could use some kind of a tool to see how they can respond to the crisis. And we did a website. And one of the mistakes we did is we didn't advertise it. So we didn't drive any traffic towards this website. We just shared among our friends and colleagues. But that was already really valuable feedback, because all of the people who downloaded the canvas, they were the consultants who were trying to sell those services, not the companies who might actually need those canvases. So it was clear for us that companies are either not finding this website, or they don't need this crisis canvas because they are so busy just dealing with COVID a year ago. And And yes, like if you want to launch a website, just go with something standard and easy, easy to host. So plenty of services there, Wix, Squarespace, Launchrock, HubSpot, just whatever works for you, and make it super simple. And don't forget that website, unless you do search engine optimization and ads, is probably not going to have any traffic unless you drive it. So there is also Wizard of Oz, and this one is missing missing a picture. Oh, okay, it's there. So another thing, we're working with a group of people who are actually lawyers, and they work on digitization of trust and combining that with blockchain, which is a lot of lingo. But basically, what it means is that instead of you holding your assets, you create this thing called the trust. So now instead of you, it's the trust, this new institution holding your assets. And how it normally happens is that you have lawyers doing contracts in the physical world, and they meet, and they sign the documents, and then at least from the legal standpoint, the assets are with the lawyers or this new trust company, not with you, so they're protected from a lot of things that might happen to you as a person. Why I'm mentioning this? Because what we did is basically role play the whole interaction. So we assigned each other a role, being like the lawyer or the client, so we understand the whole experience. And the Wizard of Oz is one of the ways to validate stuff, which is slightly different. So someone thinks that they go through an actual experience, which might be fully automated, but it's not necessarily the case. So there are many different variations of that one, and I'll show you one more later on. And like the final point around good practices and what to do, what not to do. There's this tree of cheap, fast, and good, and you can't have all of them. For prototyping, you definitely want it fast and cheap and good enough to get some kind of useful information. So when it comes to prototyping and validation, time is king. So don't try to make it too good, because it will just take too much effort. Just make sure it's good enough to give you useful information. Let me pause for a second here. How are people doing? Questions? Because now I will go to a bit more general stuff, and then we can just do a general Q&A, because I see that I'm taking a bit more time than I was expecting.
How much more time will we need?
Less than 10 minutes.
Okay, right. Any questions, printers? Savita, Nikhil, Anuj, Girish, Navneet, any questions? Kanupriya? Would be nice to hear from you. Let's not keep this as a monologue. Ashish, Pavan, Anup. You guys are all hiding behind the camera. Any questions?
Okay, so maybe in that case, let me just run through, and I'll come back to the questions in a few minutes. So a little bit about experiment-driven organization. So how you can make experimentation a way of living. Zara is a very interesting example. If you don't know, Zara is a clothing brand from Spain, and one of the things that they became really well known for is experimentation. So what they started to do is release new fashion in very, very low volume and test it in shops. So they drastically reduced the time from when you design a collection to when you sell it. And when it was really taking off, then they scaled from a single shop, they upscaled the production to other ones. So you can embed experimentation as an UX attribute into your business model. I was trying to find some case studies from India, and I did not find many, but it was really interesting to have a Flipkart video saying that during COVID, they realized that their shipping is very inefficient. So they created a digital system, and they started with a single point. They did it everything manually. Then they learned what things they need to digitize. Then they perfected it there, and they scaled from this one single point to all of India. So again, that's a really good way to experiment, because you can reduce the risk. And remember, from the very beginning, experimentation and prototyping is all about the risking. So you can reduce the risk, but you can embed it into your culture. The other thing is, and that one might take a bit more time to explain, but there's this strategic tool which is called the worldly map, or worldly diagram. And what it means is that when you have a solution, what are the things that the customer sees is at the top of this diagram. So let's say if you have a website, they will see the website in their browser. That will be on top. But under this website, there are like designs, there is shopping cart, there are servers, and so on. So if you think about it, there's different level of uniqueness and sophistication. If you want to have a website hosting service, it's definitely a commodity. I mean, like, it's very common. You don't need to innovate much. But if you want to have, like quantum computing, satellite, rocket, spaceship, that's definitely something, cutting, bleeding edge. So it will be on this side of the diagram. So the point there is that if you want to optimize things, and you need to focus on viability or core, you need different type of people and different type of approach. So this is where you need numbers and quantitative stuff. But if you're doing those things that are really like cutting edge, and also in front of the customer, you need to be much more agile, and you require different type of people who are here called pioneers. And if you think about it,
Michael,
yes.
Savita, this side. I have a question here. Like you rightly said that we need to pick the right people and have the right approach. But I think that's what the key question is, that how to actually pick the right people, how to actually visualize that who could be the right people, where to begin with. So we also not get pitfall forms, test, and everything.
Yes. So it depends where you want to go. So thinking about your business, producing textiles is probably around here. And I know that you have a lot of innovation, you have a lot of R&D, but if you have, let's say, Louis Vuitton, they are here. People see that brand, they see the sticker. It doesn't matter that you put a lot of work on R&D into creating the fabric. The fabric is treated as a commodity, and it's not seen by the customer.
Commodity.
So Louis Vuitton
Yes.
is here. Now the question is, where do you want to go from here? In which direction? You can go into, let's say, cutting edge research, let's say trying to invent the new Gore-Tex. But if you go to Gore-Tex and you don't have the brand, again, you will be underselling. So on one side, you might want to create a brand like Gore-Tex so people can see it, but on the other hand, you might want to go into research. So you can go the other way around.
Basically, we need to decide where we want to reach, right?
Yes, and you can go also the other way around. So let's say you create like Zara, they do this custom build release of fashion.
Custom build, yeah.
But then if it picks up, they just mass produce it, so it becomes more like a commodity, right? So depending where you want to go, you will pick different people. If you want to optimize and standardize processes, then you want people who are more organized and quantitative. If you want to create a brand, you probably need people who are much more open and creative, and they are willing to break rules. But it all depends where you are. You just need to keep in mind that if you take a quant and ask them to do something cutting edge, which is client facing, they're more likely to fail.
True. Okay, thank you, Michael.
You're welcome. Now, I saw that there are some ideas that you have around brands, and you probably cover jobs to be done framework. Super, super useful. And when you think about especially brands, it's super important to understand people's motivation. So if someone is driving a BMW, it might be because they like German cars. It might be because their father had a BMW. It might be because they're a very expensive lawyer who wants to look reliable and like well off. So that's why they're buying a reliable German car. So there might be many different reasons why people buy stuff. So when you think about the brand, it's really important to understand the narrative and the motivation of the people. Because let's say if people are buying Louis Vuitton, they're not necessarily buying your fabrics, they're buying something else. And if you want to have your own brand, you need to figure out what is this something else. Then try it out yourself first, right? So as I told you, I'm not a lawyer, but I acted as a lawyer in this role play test to understand what has to be done. Because in this particular business model, of course there is blockchain, but blockchain is actually very low on this hierarchy of this word lay diagram that I told you about. It's necessary to deliver a new value proposition, but people don't see it. What people see is that you have a wealthy individual, you have a lawyer in the middle, and then you have a platform, right? So if you want to do stuff, let's say green hydrogen, if you can, just buy a very cheap electrolyzer, which might be like a few $1,000s or more. Just try it out, and you will see that handling hydrogen is really hard. And then you will learn, instead of spending millions of dollars of trying to do stuff by yourself, you can really invest in understanding and getting those insights early on. Other thing, more of smaller reversible decisions is always good. I mean, if you want to develop new pharmaceuticals, you need to go through clinical trials. It will always cost a lot of money. But it's not that the people who are developing those drugs, they take every single compound for clinical trials. So they do a lot of smaller experiments, and then there is a gateway. It's like, if it looks promising enough, we invest more money, more time, and go to the next step. So you're not betting your future on one single decision in one point in time, but you try to break it down into smaller decisions which have smaller impact. Other thing is, most innovations fail. So even if you do a really good job, it doesn't mean that you will succeed, and that's that's the same in basically the whole world or the whole life. So you need to make sure that you're testing enough of those ideas, and that's why it's important for them to be cheap and for them to be quick, because then you can have more of them, so you can explore more of them, and if they pass certain threshold, then you can double down on those ideas and invest more, because through validation and prototyping, you reduce the risk and uncertainty, and you already learned a lot. And like few different ideas, maybe for the company less than for you specifically. You have existing assets and you can leverage them. So at some point in time when I was at the university, we didn't have much money, but we wanted to promote stuff. So we couldn't print out posters. So we figured out that, hey, we'll make tiny posters. Why I'm mentioning this is because you have physical shops and you have physical offices. So imagine that you make a leaflet in one of your key offices with green hydrogen, and you put a link to a website or maybe email. And then you can see whether your suppliers would actually pick up this leaflet and whether they would do something around it. If you have your shop, you can also experiment a little bit with Zara. It's like, maybe if you have shop with fabrics, you can put some new stuff there and just experiment, because you have those locations and you have those existing assets. You just need to think how you can use them. Other stuff is that in most cases, instead of deploying whole AI and spending months and all of developers, you can put a human behind. So this is the smoke and mirrors and Wizard of Oz, right? One company that I found really impressive is called Fred. And why I like them, because you start by selecting different photos and they give you suggestions what kind of stuff you might be willing to buy, but they also have a human experience. So I tested it out. There's actually a human that writes to you saying, hey, like, this is my personal recommendation. So instead of having the whole build out system and investing a lot in technology, you can have humans who are simulating this experience first, and it will be much cheaper and faster. Another thing is, having the culture and autonomy. So when I mentioned to you, we spent 6 weeks and not that much trying to build this 3D printer. We had a plan. We were very transparent, and we had a lot of autonomy. So I'm an owl, so I would stay up at night. But then a friend of mine would get up at 4:30 in the morning and go to the gym, and then he would be 5:30 in the office. So we are very transparent with stuff, but then also we had ground rules. So if there was specific expense that was under certain value, we did not consult, we just move forward. So this is combining experimentation with autonomy. And you asked me, like, are people outsourcing stuff? Yes, if you want to experiment, you need, skills, and you need some resources. It might be less than those big investments, but if you can create a culture, it's like, hey, if it's less than, I don't know, $10 or $50, just go with it. That would be really empowering.
Michal,
And yes,
if I may come in, you may
Sure.
like to close within 5 minutes because we have over time.
Yeah, I actually need like 30 seconds. So the
Okay.
last thing is, try to enjoy your prototyping. I know that it's a roller coaster of a ride and it's really hard, but try to make it fun if you can. And we can, take questions if there are any. And with this, I'm done. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Michal. That's a lot of information, and I think you've covered so much ground. Let's hear it from the sprinters. One key takeaway. Just come off mute and say it. Or you can even type it in the chat.
And Michael, I would say
Yes.
one of the key learnings is, though I joined the session a bit late, but I really found that slide very, very, interesting, that people's narrative when they are thinking about brands, that, it's not that they are buying a razor, it's the smooth skin that they are buying. And based on that, different product aspects, that when we see at a product, it's not the product that somebody is buying. It is actually behind that product what somebody is buying. Like as simple as, like, people are not buying clothes, they are buying the appearances, that they want to look good. So it's something, I would say a different angle that I learned today for looking at things, that it's not the product, it's more. And that's why we say, that storytelling is such an important thing in marketing, because it's not the product that you are selling, it's more about the emotions and the things that a person would relate to those products. So I would say that's on a personal front is a very, very important learning, that maybe going forward, I will not see a product as a product, but what actually the customer or a consumer is looking for. Like when somebody is buying a paper, it's not that they are buying a paper, it's more about that they want to write what they have there in their mind, they want to print what their great ideas are, what the goals that they want to achieve. So it's far behind what we see the physical attributes of a product. It is much beyond that when it comes to from the consumer's perspective. So thank you for that, and I would say that's a great learning for me personally.
And thank you for that insight. Just a small reaction. Yes, don't try to lock yourself into this product performance. Say, hey, our paper has to be whiter, cheaper, like lighter and whatever else, because there are many other things that you can innovate in, and they are probably much more important than just this pure technological innovation. Recently, I think it was HP that they released an ink as a service or ink as a subscription. So basically, there is a sensor in the printer that checks whether you have enough ink in the cartridge. And then based on your subscription, they will send you this ink before you know you need it. So there are many different ways in which you can innovate. So just stay open and stay patient, and the insights will come.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Very well. Anyone else? All right. Any of our coaches, would you like to just share anything? Any coaches on the call?
Oh, thanks, Michal. I know it's such a broad topic, and I mean, it's imagination is the limit. I mean, the end of the day, the sole objective is to learn, is to validate. And so therefore, there are some proven and tested ways that you have so well articulated, including a broad canvas. But even then, there are so many different ways that one can pretty much innovate on the fly, suit to the context and the situation. The objective is to validate and learn. So thanks a lot. And I'm sure sprinters will benefit a lot. Please go through these slides, Michal. I'm sure, I hope you'll share them and go through the video. Many of you have missed or joined late, but you can benefit a lot from this learning. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you and good luck.
We will post this. Yeah. One last thing before you move away, sprinters. Just type in the chat right here, right now, how you're feeling about the session. Quickly. Let's have a Zoom Shah. Go for it, guys. How are you feeling right here, right now? Insightful and different bend of looking at things. Thanks, Kavita. Rest of you?
Yeah, my hypothesis is that maybe sprinters need some rest.
Michal is the post-disrupt Monday evening signs, but that's okay. I mean, we can live with that.
That assumption may not be unduly placed. Yeah. Okay, I think we can. Sorry, Jyoti.
No, just saying that even Suman needs rest on Tuesday evening. He's saying Monday evening. So.
All right. Thank you very much, Michal. Thank you. There was a wealth of information in what you shared. We will be putting this presentation up on our drive, the link, and perhaps if you can share the slides later, Michal, it will benefit the sprinters. Thank you very much, and thank you for spending this time with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, rest up and have fun prototyping.
Thank you. Thank you, Michal.
Take care.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Ciao, Michal.
Everybody's jumping on. Bye.